Hello everybody, welcome to English 220 Week 3. This week the topic is character. We shall discuss the nature of literary characters, what they do and don't consist in, where they come from and what to do with them. There are many things that make a story that works. There is setting, style, metaphor, structure, but character is central. In much ancient literature, for example, the main character was heroic and physically courageous. To a limited degree, they might be psychologically complex. Normally, they're psychologically quite simple. In folk literature, we don't see much of the inner workings of the hero's mind. He or she must simply be good at what they're doing or very lucky. In modern literature, the main character is really a creature of the mind. Here, characters are complex psychological entities who reflect upon themselves, upon the world, and undergo change and suffer in one way or the other. As an exercise, you might recall in your minds memorable characters from books and films you have read or seen. Ask yourselves what it is about this character that you like. Sometimes it can be surprising. I, for example, can never forget a character named Murphy in a book of the same name by a leading 20th century author, Samuel Beckett. There is nothing likable about this character. He does not wash, he has unhealthy habits, and he's in no way good looking, and eventually dies as a result of a very stupid accident. I liked him because of all these things, but also because he made very creative attempts to discover what would be for him a good life. In addition, he was extremely funny. A character in a book or a story is of course not real in the sense that they do not exist physically, but they are real in the sense that they exist in our minds, or they come from our minds. I mean real in the fictional sense. The fictional character is a creation of a particularly human way of thinking. In thinking about our past life, for example, we might say to ourselves, what if something had happened that did not happen? What if I had succeeded in getting that job? Now we answer, I would not have any problems now. I would be attending meetings in New York. Okay, a fiction. When we do this, we're doing fiction. When we say if only or what if, we're doing fiction. We are creating from our own lives a fictional or hypothetical self. Of course, there are times in people's lives when it goes too far and they end up needing psychological help, but that doesn't affect us at this stage. Otherwise, it's an important way of exploring the possibilities inherent in human life, our own and other people's, both individually and socially. It takes time to build a character. We may have an idea in our head, but I think it is really only when we start writing a character or about a character that we get real development. Keep in mind that it's only as the story goes on that the character develops. At the beginning of a story, we might know only very little. For example, that a character has a certain colour hair, has a certain name, and is waiting on a corner for a certain person, nervously. It may be even when we're writing our own stories that in the beginning our character seems unconvincing or flat. Keep going, keep writing. You'll find that as you add detail to detail, your character will start taking on a viable life. Now, big question, where do characters come from? They of course come from experience, very often our own experience. They come from observation, that is our observation of others. They come from the imagination. We pull them out of nowhere. They emerge from situations. We come up with a story and a character fits into that story or emerges from that story. And most often, as Linda Anderson says in her book, Creative Writing, characters come from a combination of factors or a combination of all these things. Let's look at a few of these aspects of the origins of a character. I want to look at experience, observation, and synthesis. That is, drawing your character from a combination of things. Experience. We can start with our own experience, actually because that's the thing we probably know best. Over time, we accumulate certain memories that are immediate or vivid to us. We feel that there is just something about that particular that particular memory or action. And so we might begin a story, for example, quote, "I was a child of 6. School was over for the day and I was walking home. The afternoon sky burned down on my shoulders and head. It felt good. The streets were full of beeping cars, fruit sellers shouting their wares. I wondered to myself." End quote. We have a story. Straight away, we have a story. As readers, we're somehow pulled into the story. We recognize the scene, the city, the scene of a typical city, young kid, 6 years old, walking home from school. It's a hot day. Then the child starts wondering to him or herself. We haven't stated whether it's a male or a female at this stage. And straight away, we're pulled in to that character. Now, the thing is, the story, such a story, because I'm sure we've all walked home from school at 6 years of age with the sun burning down on our heads and the cars beeping and people shouting. Okay? Now, it may start from our own experience. That child may be us. We may be leading up to something we saw on the way home from school that day. However, as we write, the character will develop, and it may take a direction, an unexpected direction. It may start turning into something that we never in our life experienced, or it may continue faithful, if you like, to the experience with which we started out. Okay? Either one is a good way to go. The thing is, the human self, the conscious self, is a multitude of experiences, a multitude of thoughts, a multitude of images and feelings, and as such is an immensely rich source for characters. So by all means, use that source. If you feel a little bit shy about continuing to write about yourself, and you'd rather not, then introduce a disguise. Give yourself different color hair, different age, add a few things, and just see how the story goes. Or if you want to be faithful to the story, then, as I said before, do so. Both can lead to interesting places. Now, let me just add to this. There's a kind of tradition, it's mainly a European tradition, where a first novel by a particular writer deals with that person's experience in becoming an adult, starting perhaps with images of childhood and then exploring the processes through which that person becomes more or less independent. Often such stories set out to explore the process of how we come to be who we are. Obviously, such story draws heavily on our own experience and memories and our sense of self. Yet, in a very real way, it is still fictional. Even when we write about ourselves, somehow we're still writing fiction. How is that? Because we select those aspects of our experience we like or think will best fit into the story, as it unfolds. We subtract those things that don't fit or that we don't like. After all, we can't include everything about ourselves in one story. We may add things that didn't happen to us just for the sake of the story, to improve it, and so on, until it becomes clear that we're actually inventing a character. So even though we may have started out writing I, as I was walking home from school that day, in the end we have an invention. Okay. Another thing is that a story has a structure, it has a rhythm, and this too can determine whether or not certain aspects of our own lives that we started writing about continue to fit into the story or not. Now, I'll give you another example how this might work. How it is that a human being is a natural fiction writer, and that actually, when we look at it, we're all fiction writers. We all have the potential to write fiction. And I'll give you an example of how this works, of where it may start. Think back to childhood. Childhood is such a rich source for these kinds of activities. Think back to childhood. Your mother says, "Who ate those biscuits?" She goes on to say that she saved them. She had saved them for a time when visitors would arrive. And now the visitors had arrived and there were no biscuits. The visitors were sitting out there waiting to be served up some delicious thing. And so your mother was put in a very difficult situation. So she says to the child who happens to be closest, "Who ate those biscuits?" What does the child say, the innocent little thing? "No, not me. It was my brother. It was my sister. It was the visitors who ate the biscuits. It was the wind that came into the kitchen and carried the biscuits away." Now, we recognize the situation, of course. It's the childish lie. Now, the thing about this lie is that it's immensely creative. It not only gets the child off the hook, and manages to put the blame on somebody else. It's a perfect example of the power that the human intellect has to create an alternative reality. Now, there are many reasons we create these alternative realities. To defend ourselves, to entertain ourselves, to give ourselves therapy, to learn from life's many possibilities. Okay. Now, not everybody, of course, goes on to use this power to write fiction. But that's exactly what we're doing in this class. Now, observation. A writer is one who observes. Most writers like to see themselves as observers of human nature. I'm sure we all see people whose lives might make good material for fiction. For example, I'll give you an example from my own experience. I recently wrote a short story that included as one of the main characters my great aunt. That is, the wife of my grandfather's brother. I hardly knew this woman as a child. As it is, I know very little about her. But I loved her name. And I loved her name because it was a name that she shared with a famous film star, a famous Hollywood film star. A famous Hollywood film star had the same name as my great aunt. Now, neither did I know anything about the film star. I've never seen any of her films. I was a child. She was, I think by that stage, an ex-film star. She interested me as a child because she had the same name as my great aunt. Okay. Out of this, arose a character.